Hello, everybody, and welcome to Sitting in the Dark. I'm Pete Wright, and I'm sitting in the basement on the stairs with Tommy Metz III.
Hello.
Hello.
Happy to be here.
Kyle Olson.
That's me.
And our featured educator today is the one and only Kynan Diaz. Hello, Kynan.
Howdy.
And we're doing survival horror. That's how you framed it for us, because you're building a class, right? And so we are your course prep, is what I understand.
Yes, exactly. You are my guinea pigs. You are my TAs. Yes.
We live
That's
to
right.
serve. Do you wanna give us a little intro on what you why you picked this particular theme and walk us through the movies?
Yeah, absolutely. So survival horror, you've probably heard from video games, right? And it's usually associated with like Resident Evil, and we're going to watch the movie version of Resident Evil today. And one of the reasons I think it's interesting is that when you look and see, like, where did survival horror come from, people often talk about its antecedents being in, like, Lovecraft, which makes some sense, right? And also some Japanese horror. But I think a lot of the most interesting elements of survival horror come from American disaster movies like the Towering Inferno and the Poseidon Adventure. So what are some of the things we think of when we think of like survival horror? Do you have any things as you're looking at like the genre? Yeah, Tommy.
Because I've tried some survival horror video games, I don't usually like them because I use video games to be in control, and survival horror is all about robbing you of basic resources and stuff like that. I did like Alan Wake 2. I've been talking about too much, but I loved that, and I would consider that survival horror. What it is generally is you can't run fast enough. There's always walking, and you never have enough bullets and or batteries for your flashlight. You can't just sort of melee or run your way through things. You have to usually solve puzzles and really worry about your resources the entire time.
Worry about everything, I would say.
Yeah.
Right. So you can't kill everything usually. That's virtually impossible in most of these. And so you end up fighting through stealth, evasion. I think a good way of putting it is you're working on defense rather than offense. So that's unusual for a video game, and then even unusual for horror movies, which is why I think it's interesting.
I've been thinking a lot about setting too, particularly because one of the movies inverts a premise in setting that I think is really fascinating. The idea that you're isolated, and as a result of that isolation, you are vulnerable somehow. Right. No one can hear you scream. That sort of thing. Right. And so, in addition to the limited resources and the weird slow walking, that adds to that sort of psychological horror.
And that's found a lot in survival horror video games like Silent Hill, both the game and the movie. The Mist, I would consider maybe survival horror.
Yeah. Right.
Belko Experiment, the remake of The Crazies, like the space that you're allowed to move in keeps changing a little bit, but you're never just able to go.
Yeah, and I think this is what separates this from some earlier horror movies that don't have the disaster movie part built into it. The isolation that results in like systems failures and societal failures. So I might not think of, say, the Christian Nyby Howard Hawks of the Day, no, that's not what it's called. The Thing from Another World. I was going to call it The Day of the Innocent Spell. Sorry. The Thing from Another World. They're isolated, but it's not about things falling apart. That society sticks together. Whereas in these 1970s and 60s disaster movies, things start to fall apart in a really, really bad way. That is compounding whatever monster, alien creature is out there. So it's about human failure as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Human failure. But the other side of that is all of these movies demonstrate what I think video games do so well, which is skills gathering, right? Like you start out as a rube, and by the end you're a badass. Like that has to be the general curve.
Or you remember you're a badass.
Or you remember you're a badass.
You feel your inner badass.
The badass was coming inside you all along.
Right.
Yeah. So then, in addition to everything you're talking about, which is right, I think the problem solving aspect. Some critics point out that there are fewer NPCs, non-playable characters in survival horror than we might normally have, which means that you have to rely on an old trope that we love, which is the Book of the Vampire.
I was just going to say that.
You were just going to say it.
It was right there. Oh God! I just I didn't know if I should raise my hand.
Right. That, we have this elaborate backstory, usually of people who have died, and their last dying wish was to write things down and help you solve your problems in this mansion or a secret lab or whatever it is, right? And I think one last thing I want to look at as we're looking at our movies today is the idea of permadeath. And obviously, in a video game, you either die or you don't. Mario and Luigi can die, right? Mm-hmm. But in survival horror, oftentimes you are playing as one main character and you're trying to keep your little squad alive. And the game continues on, even if you lose some of your squad. Right. You don't get to necessarily start over and say, I want to keep everybody alive. And the game changes with multiple endings, depending on whether you're able to keep 3 or 4 or 5 or the most important of your allies alive, which I think happens in a disaster movie, obviously. And I'm not here to spoil, say, major disaster movies about cruise liners that flip upside down. But we also have, the transference of heroes, right? Like we lose heroes sometimes, and we think that our main character is one person, and it turns out that they're not, that that's somebody else who survives.
Sometimes sharks just pop out of pools and eat things.
Yes. Sometimes the big hero ends up the ultimate heroic act by self-sacrifice.
Yes.
Yep.
So the other people can win. Yeah.
Yeah.
Also often the most expensive actor.
Yes. Right. It's much cheaper that way.
The board.
Yeah. So we picked 4 movies here. We have Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds, George Romero's The Dawn of the Dead, Paul W.S. Anderson's Resident Evil, and Ready or Not, which is made by the film collective called Radio Silence, which is directed by Matt Bednelli-Olsen and Tyler Gillett. So where did you want to start today, everybody?
Well, if I just want to make sure, flag on the field, we don't forget that for each movie, we have an opportunity for axes to grind. I mean, does it feel natural to start in chronological order? That's the order I watched them in.
Yes.
So.
Me too.
All right.
Oh, I did a reverse chronological, but hey, I'm easy.
Kyle, you traitor.
Kyle, what? Yeah, and I would love to hear axes to grind, and I will try very hard not to be defensive about The Birds, which is one of my very favorite movies. But I'm usually defensive when I show it to somebody. I'm like, oh, I know all the things you're going to say, and I just don't care. But who has an axe to grind first?
I have 2. No, I have 3. But they're very pithy and of the time of, like, when the movie was made, we were doing things differently. I love that Tippi Hedren goes to this town and shows up at the teacher's house and is like, hello, I'm a total stranger. What are all the town's children's names? That's not stranger danger at all. I love that. Like, what a terrific prank. I broke into your house and brought you birds. That's like the nicest jackass version of the entire world. And then just the amount of time when birds are attacking the people are driving convertibles with the tops down.
These are simpler times.
I share some of those the more ridiculous axes. I think the thing that I struggled with the most was that I didn't feel like I was in confident hands that the movie knew what movie it was making.
Yes.
Right? It felt like there was a lot going on before we got to the part that was like on the tin, and once we got there, I struggled to find the threat. And I recognize that I am watching this from the perspective of, I also watched Ready or Not, and I've seen a lot of movies, and this is not modern filmmaking, but some of, I think, what is celebrated, what I've heard celebrated about The Birds is the Hitchcockian nature of it all. And I didn't feel like this was a great example of that.
Mm-hmm.
So I stand ready for your able defense. But if Kyle, do you have access?
Yeah, so I would agree with that. I'm a Hitchcock fan. I wrote a paper on him in college and stuff too, and I had the same kind of reaction as I'm watching it, because with these kind of movies, the idea is at the start you establish reality, like here's what normal is, and then all of a sudden strange things start coming in, and then that's when you sort of build up all of this tension of like, oh, now this is where it gets weird. But it's like the past is a foreign country, and I watched the start of this, and I'm like, I don't understand this at all in terms of, did people really live like this? Did they really talk like this? Is this really how humans interacted with each other? Like it's a department store that also sells birds, and then there's the weird thing of like, oh, I was in the court and you pulled a prank and broke a window, and so now she's flirting with him by pretending to be all of that was so mannered and strange that I even had trouble going, wait, this is the normal part, right? This is
is this a director's cut?
Those wacky white people doing their stuff. For me, it was so bizarre to start with that when the bird shop, I was like, oh, thank goodness.
Please, birds, start taking someone out.
I had forgotten all of that. Actually, I'd seen this movie before, but not since college. And I'd forgotten all of the buildup of the relationships. And even as I'm watching, I would kind of go, no, wait, that's his mom? And that's
right.
That's
right.
Because like clearly those actresses are about the same age, and they just put gray dye on that woman's hair.
Yeah, so Jessica Tandy, who plays the mother, and Tippi Hedren, who plays Melanie, they're not that different in age. And actually, on the
Manchurian
poster,
Candidate all over again,
and Suzanne Plachette,
exactly,
very young Suzanne Plachette.
But the poster that's famous of Melanie in the green suit is actually Tippi Hedren's body, but with Jessica Tandy's face. So, like the filmmakers are aware of how similar these characters look and how confusing it is that we have a love triangle essentially between this man and his mother and his girlfriend, and that he's essentially replacing this this Oedipal relationship he has with his mother with this new woman. So that's all there.
Yeah. Well, but here's the thing, Kynan, that I'm curious your take on. Like, how important are we to take that relationship as a part of the demented nature of the birds? Like, how serious do you take it?
Very so very seriously. It's everything you're saying is absolutely correct, because for me, what's fascinating about The Birds is that it is a rom-com that gets interrupted by an apocalypse story. So all this weird stuff that you're talking about, like, is throwing me off, is what I love about the movie. So except for the very opening where Melanie's like looking at birds, and we've just had like the title sequence, it's like, right. Then we just go into this weird mannered, is a good way of putting it, like you were saying, Kyle, like rich white people rom-com about people who have nothing more important to do than to play pranks about buying each other gifts that they don't want, and breaking into their house and driving 2 miles north out of San Francisco. And it's like these really, really petty, small people issues that is interrupted by the apocalypse. And I think for me, it's the perfect way to show the apocalypse, as opposed to, people who are already in the mode where they're like, they're already existential and they're already thinking about the meaning of life, etc. These people have none of those problems at all. So I think they're the perfect venue for it.
It's an interesting connection then back to disaster movies, because that's exactly what like Towering Inferno and Poseidon Adventure do. It's like this apocalyptic event interrupts banality of life. It interrupts our general day-to-day pretending. And now we have to find a way to get real.
Right, exactly. So I think the movie gets more real, and as you're saying, like, you start to live in it more. There's birds. So you finally get some birds are in this bird movie. And they start killing people, and things get really, really real. And people start talking less and communicating more cinematically, right? The movie, I like that term, mannered. I'm going to borrow that with my class when I teach the movie in the summer, right? It gets less mannered as it goes along because they don't have enough time. They just have to, barricade the doors and bandage people's wounds. And that's exactly what I love about it.
And we do get all of the survival horror tropes. Like, we get the injuries, we get the surprise holes in the wall where invaders can get in and cause trouble.
Discovery of an old man's dead body.
Discovery of the body, absolutely. We get the non-believers. Like, there's an extensive
that diner scene is crazy.
Yeah. That diner scene it feels like this is an example of one of these kinds of scenes done poorly, where I would have said, let it breathe, like The Birds. Like, this is a case example of how to do the non-believer stuff well.
Right.
For me.
And that's, she's isolated from her upper class, like crazy rich Caucasians world in San Francisco, and she's moved up to Bodega Bay, and so she's even separate from them, right? So there's also this like undercurrent of like big city, small town, right? Like you often will see that in movies from this time period of like the killers come from out of town, right? And like the small town is great, and the anything that's urban is bad, and so she's even isolated there. And then they, of course, so they assume like, oh, you must have caused this. This all happened when you started here, and I think you're evil. In that great that great close up.
That's the societal breakdown part also.
Right.
Yeah.
Just turn against the other when you don't understand what's going on.
Which was, we celebrated that before repeatedly and loudly in The Mist. Like that's one of those fantastic sequences, societal breakdown sequences. Right.
And, another thing about like the disaster movie having real like unities of time and place, like it once the movie gets started, we're in one night when the ship is overturned, or one night when the tower is infernoed, or whatever, or the swarm has gotten out. And here we have it over the course of a couple days. But I love, one of the most famous costumes in movie history is this green suit that Melanie wears, right? Because she doesn't think she's going to be in Bodega Bay for very long. So we get to even like track her character arc by basically like seeing her looking the same and then gradually just getting more John McClane in Die Hard, battle damage and battle scars, right? And seeing how she progresses there. Yeah.
I think a lot of the sequences actually even being from that really, really work. And I think a lot of the heavy lifting is being done by the sound design.
Yeah, definitely.
Like it's like on paper to go, no, they're birds, but they want to kill you. Then it's like, yes, very easily you can get to birdemic. But yes, the way they have it here, they actually, they start out pretty simply, and then like the sparrows come flying into the house. That's a genuinely like disturbing thing, because it's like all of a sudden they're in your space, you're not in theirs anymore, and just that swarm. My wife's biggest fear is swarms of whatever. Like any movie that has a lot of a thing, she gets freaked out. Like she got freaked out by Wreck-It Ralph 2 because there's a Ralph made of Ralphs. It's a lot of thing. So yeah, a lot of those things I think worked really, really well. And even on the counterpoint of that, at the end, him walking through these birds who are just mellow. But by this point, your tension is already so high, and like at any point, these could become murder birds.
Yes, I'm surprised that none of you used your axe to grind to complain about the special effects, which I think, of course, are dated in some, yes, but you're like, yeah, of course, yeah. But the sound effects are so ahead of their time. And some of them are real birds, and some of them are electronic in ways that real birds wouldn't sound, but it triggers that part of your lizard brain that's like, there's something on me. And so they're working with new instruments, something called a trautonium. It's some electrical sort of instrument. And then Bernard Herrmann, who's the great composer of Citizen Kane and Psycho and Taxi Driver, there's no music in the entire film, but he is credited as a sound consultant, and the thought was that he was helping sort of score the sound effects, right? So yeah, there's no music except for the little creepy kid song outside of the school in the most famous sequence. Yeah,
that made me hate music.
Kyle said something that triggered another thing, which is the inversion of safety, right? Which is something that's interesting because of one of the movies that we have here. Like we have this environment, and we talked about survival horror as one of the tropes is here's an environment that was formerly seen as safe, and it becomes violated. It again goes back to our home invasion. The Birds could be a home invasion movie.
Yeah.
And I think we have to watch. We get to watch kind of in slow motion this safe environment being pulled apart as the birds' beaks start. That sequence where he passes the door and sees the birds able to peck through the solid core door is really threatening, and it's not even that challenging of an effect, right? And yet it is incredibly threatening because the house has already been so damaged. By the time they do the ultimate reveal of the house, and she opens the top room and you see the roof has been torn asunder, like you realize, oh, there is no safety anymore. That's the ultimate like punchline to the joke of them hiding from a flock of birds. There's no safety.
Right.
It's interesting that this movie is a weird case of it. Not that you need it to make sense. Just the idea of birds going crazy is fine. Excuse me. But it makes more sense after you watch the trailer.
Mm-hmm.
The trailer is just of Hitchcock talking to the camera, but walking around, and there's all these birds stuffed on the walls, and he's eating a roast chicken, and he has a quill. He's like, birds, we always honor birds, and they're great, but he's showing all the horrible things we've done to birds throughout time. And then Tippi Hedren runs in and goes, quick, they're coming. And then it just goes to birds. It's cool. But I mean, it talks about how like the earth is committing revenge against the oppressors, and that's not really brought up. They order fried chicken in the diner, but that's never actually really brought up in an there's no Book of the Vampire in that, other than just
really interesting note. Yeah,
of them just guessing, right? They're just grasping at straws to figure
end of the
out
world,
what it is.
says Drunky.
The end of the world, the end of the world, and those are our two options, I suppose. It's the end of the world, or Melanie did it. Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
But I love those Hitchcock trailers that he starts doing at the end of the 50s, and he has one that's Psycho, and he's just going around to the Bates Motel and saying, "No, we wouldn't want to go in there. No, I couldn't possibly show you that."
Right.
And just like he recognizes in a way that potentially when we're watching The Birds, without thinking of Hitchcock, like outside like a Hitchcock class or something, he recognizes that people are approaching his movies as comedies, right? So now we tend to think of them as just straight up horror, etc. But Psycho is very, very funny if you watch it with an audience. I don't know if you've ever had the pleasure of doing that. Yeah, and The Birds starts off very funny, but then I think becomes his bleakest movie because there is no
with the birds leaning into the turns when she's driving like a crazy
so
person.
Funny.
Yeah. Just super slapstick. Yeah,
yeah, that's so funny. And so the last beat of the movie in The Birds is young Veronica Cartwright, who grows up to be one of the great scream queens, right? She's Lambert in Alien, and she gets that great last scene in Invasion of the Body Snatchers, right? She like is trying to take pity, and she's like, "Oh, can we bring the lovebirds with us because they haven't done anything?" And it really is like, geez, like that's the last thing you're thinking about is are we? I don't know if I can elegantly put that into words. What that is like honoring this little girl's innocence or something, or
hashtag not all
that.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. That's exactly what it is.
AB. I think one of the things it's saying, and it's something that I want to get to later, one thing that almost all of these movies also has in mind of like, yes, they survived, but at what cost? Tippi Hedren is a broken person. But but I think maybe it's showing the resilience in the girl that maybe we can turn and change our relationship with birds. And she, who you would think would be the most broken of everyone, she's the one that's still thinking we can't just leave things in cages, which there's something sweet and hopeful about that.
Yeah.
Right. Oh, well, that's much nicer than I've ever read the ending, but I think that's true.
Sure.
It's very sweet. Do you all know the original ending of The Birds?
No.
That they had storyboarded and were going to do, but then they just figured it was too expensive. So they do get out of Bodega Bay, the four of them, and Melanie has become the daughter to Lydia, and Lydia has become the mother instead of the wife, and everything's sort of fixed in the backseat of the car. And they're driving in there, and they get to San Francisco. They turn around the corner, and the Golden Gate Bridge is covered in birds.
Oh, wow.
Yes,
cool.
Yes, but Hitchcock decided that no, they could do that just without that. I guess it was too expensive, but even the lack of the end at the end of the movie to signify like, okay, we don't know where they're going. And,
I didn't even notice that. That's cool.
Yeah. And presumably everybody dies, or
but that's like the perfect. It's another one of the perfect tropes, right? That it becomes at some point a road movie. Right.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Like there is, and in the case of The Birds, it's a road movie away from something toward uncertainty. And I like it because you can watch it with a hopeful eye, or just assume everybody dies at the hands of our avian overlords, and that's fine too.
Yeah, they start putting people in cages and using them for batteries, probably.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
That there is one other visual that I really enjoyed that maybe could be taken as subtext as we treat birds differently than we treat humans, and therefore we deserve to be punished. Is the movie starts and you just have all of these birds in cages, and they're in cages. One manages to escape, is immediately put back. And then when we go to the Bodega Bay shopkeeper, where she asks directions, he's in a cage. He's behind his desk in this cage looking out, but then he is very easily able to just walk around it, walk outside and point to where he was, and then put himself back in his cage. He has the freedom that none of the animals do, other than the seabirds and everything else, which I just thought that was kind of an elegant thing. There was no need to put a cage there unless you were doing some sort of point.
Oh, that's really, I haven't thought about that. But of course that's there in the most famous thing from the birds, right? Which is the phone booth, which is she gets put in there, and the camera, there's a lot of shots, much more than most Hitchcock movies, that are like from above, like looking down at them. And some people call them God shots, but
or bird shots.
Bird shots, yes,
it's right there.
But then, when Melanie's getting attacked on all sides, she gets to be claustrophobic, and she just starts, twirling and not knowing where to go, and just feeling that cage in there, which for a moment feels like, oh, this could be safe, but then we see the birds can go right through that, right? And then,
like every other setting, the setting itself becomes a weapon. Right, as shards of glass are on her, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and you're right. She's broken by the end of the movie. She, when Mitch saves her from the upstairs attack, which was like a 7-day shoot of real birds tied to first-time film actor Tippi Hedren, with nylon strings.
Oh my God.
Yeah, and awful things like that. And when Mitch brings her down and she's passed out, but when she wakes up, there's this shot of her looking directly in the camera, and she's still imagining those birds, right? And she's swatting at them. Just awful. So yeah, the movie has to transfer our hero status, our protagonist status, to Mitch, because I don't know if Melanie is a person anymore by the end of that movie.
And the mom had already said that when her husband died, she had lost all of her strength. I wish I was a stronger person. It's terrible how you depend on someone else for strength, and then suddenly all the strength is gone and you're alone. That's also kind of a totem for survival horror, in effect. Just that idea. You're left without your defenses. You're left without other people or resources. All of your strength is gone.
Right. Do you want to talk about Dawn of the Dead?
Yeah.
Sure.
This was a first-time viewing for me. I will.
Me too.
Wow,
oh, really?
This is the first time of the birds for me. I'd seen the other one.
Really?
Hey.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Very exciting. All right, what'd you think?
Well, I have trouble. I forget. Was it Kyle or Tommy who has a pet peeve that is, you have 3 different cuts to choose from audience, and you have to figure out which one is the right cut to see.
Right.
I think I ended up watching the international cut. Afterwards, I sort of went down the list and was like, checked my running time, and I was like, okay, I
believe that's what I watched.
I think that's
what I watched 140 minutes. So
that's the one I watched.
I think
that's
the extended version, or
yes.
Of those.
Yeah, I was really surprised, knowing Night of the Living Dead pretty well, how quickly this movie just goes into total anarchy. We don't start again with like something small and it's something out there in the country. We start urban. We start in this news station that is so terrifying. No zombies, no zombies at all, but just everybody losing their minds, and no one has control over like what the objective truth is out there. I don't know if that resonated more today in 2024 about them putting up their supers of, okay, everybody go to this fire station, and then no, that fire station is destroyed, and you're sending people to their deaths, and people yelling on the air, and just seeing like people sitting in the anchors chairs yelling at each other and swearing at each other was very triggering for me. It was really awful.
And rightfully so, because I think one of the things that the movie does that's so unsettling by opening this way, by showing chaos in a newsroom, is this is the group that is supposed to be infallible, right? These people bring us our news. They're supposed to be the voice of trust and calm.
That's who you turn to for
That's who
safety.
You turn to, right? And if they fall, what hope is there? And I think that is a brilliant choice for this movie. The slow part comes later.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Right. Yeah. Nothing slow about the beginning whatsoever. And just seeing people abandoning their posts. At one point, there's a producer who comes in and he's like, "We need to do this, and you all are giving the wrong information." And two people just walk out of the station, and he turns to the security guard and says, like, "Hey, you need to stop them. They need to be here to save people." And the security guard just walks away from his post too.
Yeah.
And then our heroes, it turns out, they're whispering to each other like, "We're going to steal the news helicopter," and it's every person for themselves. And it's like, oh my goodness. And I guess these are our heroes because we're going to spend time with them, right? But there's nobody who is who's being heroic, right? There's nobody being like, no, we have to do this for the sake of the news and the people and any of this. Like, no, we have 4 seats on this helicopter, and that's all we got.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is very disaster movie-ish, right?
It is. Limit the scope, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right away.
It was good 20 minutes in before I was like, who are we following? Like,
yeah.
I mean, I had not watched any of the stuff beforehand. I kind of wanted to go in just like I was walking into the movie theater in 1978, sitting down. Like, it took me a long time to figure out who are the main characters. Like, who are the people we're actually going to follow? Who's going to survive? Which, for a zombie movie, it's actually pretty interesting. Now it's like, you know who the stars are, so you can basically, they just die in billing order. At this point, like, nobody's anybody, so like, it's all up to grab.
Yeah.
So, do we have axes to grind?
Oh, we didn't do our axes to grind.
I
had
for
never too late, Kynan. It's never too late.
I had 0, I think. I thought I was super impressed with this.
Yeah, no, I think this is a masterpiece.
I wouldn't go as far as masterpiece, but
my axe is with you, Tom.
I had no axe is great too. I really love just the indie spirit of it, like the George Romero of the whole thing of like, he has really big ideas and then he has to beg, borrow, and steal to get any money to do it.
Yeah.
So it's like, oh God, I wish there were a time that he could have had just a little bit more, just like you could tell that was the first take. Like, he's just like, we got it, let's go. I mean, that Roger Corman school of, we got it, let's just move on. I only have this mall for a couple more days.
Well, not to get too far ahead of ourselves, but George Romero was one of the original directors on Resident Evil, the movie. So that was his chance at the biggest budget, and they just said, no, never mind. That's just not going to work out.
They didn't like his script, right?
They didn't like his script, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So who knows what could have been? He, the quote that I saw was him trying to hold on to the original. Again, he wasn't using the terms, but survival horror aspect to Resident Evil, and less like House of the Dead, which was where at that point in 2002, where survival horror was going. It had already sort of moved past. We're in a mansion and there's not a whole lot of stuff going on and you're evading, and it was more like shooting everything. And so apparently one of the problems with Romero's script was that it was honoring the original Resident Evil when Resident Evil had already become passé. So they made it into a Paul W.S. Anderson action movie. Mm-hmm. The chaos in Dawn of the Dead, like Kyle's saying, like, we don't know who we're following. Like, we start to follow this cop who we know is Trooper or Roger, and he like looks over to his buddy and he's like, "Hey, you're going to be okay, man. And we're going to go in there and this is our plan." And then that guy is shot in the head immediately. And then we replace him with some other rookie looking guy who looks exactly like the previous guy. And we start having the two of them like going through this apartment complex, and all of a sudden the cops are the bad guys, the zombies are the bad guys, sometimes the residents are the bad guys, and then this other guy who looked like the guy who just died ends up shooting himself in the head without much warning. And it's like, well, geez, I don't even know where we're supposed to be, right?
It's great. It's a great feeling of being on your back foot as an audience member. Like, I like that bit of unsettling that I don't know how to track the movie. I think it's smart. And it gives me a greater sense of calm when they start regaining control and when they find the mall and when they clean the mall. That's some of my favorite stuff, mostly because I still have a childhood dream of like
living in a mall,
being locked in a mall. Like I really do. Like career opportunities is one of my favorite
video
movies.
game
I
pizza
was
place.
just about to say career opportunity.
Yeah, no, I saw you looking. I saw career opportunities in your eyes, Kyle. So that is really satisfying that here we get an island in the middle of this movie of people who are figuring out how to sort of outmaneuver survival horror by making house in a mall, and it's great.
And it becomes
that's
really
my absolute favorite part of this movie.
Subversive for survival horror. They have all of the resources in the world, and yet it's still ultimately, even before the bikers show up, it's not working. Their utopia, in some of those later montage shots where you see them like through glass and stuff in different outfits, they have become mannequins.
Right.
Like they have become non-human parts of the mall, because just given all of that without any type of culture, rules, things to do, culture, all of the resources in the world is just not enough. You need civilization, you need purpose. Great.
I hate to be this pretentious, but like there was a great sense of ennui. It got to that point. I was like, that's when they were all sort of just sitting around in this nicely furnished room with all of the trappings and having this food on these fancy plates, and all of them just staring off in the distance. I was like, this movie is brilliant.
I wonder if there's
really took us all the way through there.
Room for like a tiny bit of relief when the bikers show up.
Yeah.
Of something to do, another problem to solve, another something. Yeah.
Well, and that's exactly right, Tom, because that's when you get the Spigot release of Flyboy, who goes crazy and can't help himself but to start shooting these guys.
Right. To start taking risks.
Yeah, taking risks.
Yeah.
Living again.
Yeah. That is not an axe to grind, but that's the thing that makes my skin crawl the most, is unnecessary risk they start taking. Yeah. And they're like, oh, no, we don't have. I'll just go without the gun. I'll just walk past them. I won't worry about this, right? And it's like, well, geez, like me at home, I want to take zero risks. Can we just stay in the Spam room and eat Spam? Like, what's wrong with that, right? But then that's not being human, right? They need to try to be human. So yeah, it's Flyboy. Like being territorial right at the end, like. The Peter, who's sort of the closest thing we have to a main character, right? He's saying like, hey, these bikers, they just want the place, and the place is not us, is sort of the subtext, right? Like we are not this place. Like let them take Cinnabons and take mannequin heads and take jewelry and take cash, right? That's not us. But Flyboy has made this his house, right? That he has made this his castle. And so, he's never articulated that to anybody, but that's what his problem is. Like, how could they come in here? How could they do this to us?
This is where I'm going to raise my child.
Right. Yeah. And it's really, I was surprised by how, I've heard about like the anti-consumerism aspect about the movie, which makes sense with the mall, but it's more than just buying things and being on sale. It's about like suburbia and like making your little house, and that's what they do in their little Spam room, and they start bringing up TVs and paintings and pictures, and they turn them into little apartments. And that was something that I had not clocked, but just based on what other people were saying about it, like about if they aren't making a heteronormative couple up there, right, with a little bed and matching sheets and any of that stuff, then they don't know how to be people. And that was super shocking. And, still clutching pearls, like, oh, how could he be saying these things for a movie from 50 years ago? It's like getting right to the heart of what it is to be, an American and a person.
Well, I just love, even as now we're in 2024 and malls are dying, that I still love this idea of, why are they all coming here? And it's like, because this was important to them. This was where they gathered. This is, I just love that idea of, it's so embedded, that consumerism, whatever, is so embedded in them that even dead, they still go to the mall.
Bargains instead of brains.
Right, it's just like, it might be a good sale. Yeah, I mean, that thing is, the way that he uses zombies, that they just become background, that is like, we're so used to now the zombies as sort of the stars or whatever, like the most violent kills. And they have a lot of, violence and stuff in this, but it's like the zombies they just don't care. Like, as opposed to, you have the fast, slow zombie debate, and you have like, they just hunger, all this stuff. These ones are just milling around until something happens, and then all of a sudden they sort of go into action. it's such a different feel to it because you sort of get used to it in the way that they get used to it.
And what happens to the humans, right? Exactly right.
Yeah.
The humans become zombies that just aren't eating other people.
Yeah, and then we see with Flyboy, then and then immediately he goes home.
That was shocking.
Yes.
So they've really peppered that in a way that doesn't feel like you're being telegraphed exposition of like, oh, so they have some sort of skills remaining, but it's really their old life on autopilot. And we've seen some of that. And again, a very funny movie. We've seen, zombies holding guns, but not knowing what to do with them, right? Sort of this vague thing. And then, when Steven is returning home to his wife, like, hi, honey, I'm home, right?
Mm-hmm.
That was shocking and just really made me sink down in my chair. I was like, no, of course, that's what would happen.
Well, and it was leveraged well in the follow-up, right? Day of the Dead. And have you guys seen Day yet either? I know Tom and I have talked about that one before. It's one of those things like when there are some really fantastic moments in Day of the Dead, and it's also generally I don't think it's as good a movie with some really highlight moments that make it really special. What are you? How about the 2004 re-release or
Zack Snyder?
do over? Yeah, the Zack Snyder version.
I love it.
Me too.
That one I actually had seen before, and I really enjoyed it.
How is the first 20 minutes is perfection.
Yeah.
It's so good. I really like that movie. And Ty Burrell being like the world's biggest jerk.
Yeah.
And then way later watching Modern Family Matters guide and being like, oh my God, that's that horrible guy from the mall.
So as someone who hasn't seen that remake yet, because I'm a big wuss, how do you all track the difference where, in Dawn of the Dead, we have like 4 characters and we have basically like 3 times as many people hanging around the mall in the Zack Snyder Dawn of the Dead. So like, is just the numbers of them enough to explain like some of the different focus of those movies? Like,
yeah, there's already like security guards that have commandeered the mall. There's people like, it's more of a living world. And then ragtags pick up each other on the way to the mall. There's already people there. Power disputes.
Yeah,
and
you get some tribalism stuff of like, and then them like protecting the woman who's going to have a child. So it's like then it becomes a whole thing of like for the baby and that. Yeah, I would say if you guys just do it, don't watch the unrated whatever extended cut.
Oh, I didn't know there was one. Is it?
There is, yeah.
Is it dumb?
They add a coda onto the end of it that really pissed me off.
Just one version, for God's sake. My other show is The Exorcist Minute, and we had to, we have 2 versions at least to pick from, and it's the bane of my existence. Yeah.
Oh, it's so frustrating.
Yeah, but one of the things I like about the Romero Dawn of the Dead is that it's 4 people, and I was surprised even as I'm criticizing the 2 men who mess up in their errors, their risk taking and their masculinity that gets them in trouble. I was really surprised how much I cared for those people. Again, even without seeing very much of their home life or any things we would typically say we would need for like quote unquote character development. Like I think it's just the fact of like being there, watching them solve problems, like being in their heads, and then the lack of other choices. You're either these 4 people or you're nobody. So I was really, really taken by how much I cared when they didn't make it.
Especially slow rolling the death of which one was Trooper?
Yeah.
That I thought was really, really well done. Like just watching him deteriorate and how he was still useful long after he, probably his utility should have been up.
Yeah, but even he was saying that like I'm gonna be here as long as I need to be, right? I still have some use. Yeah, that was super cool.
The last point is the Book of the Vampire. It starts very early in the form of Richard France, the psychologist or the doctor on stage, just trying to get people to believe him on television in the very beginning. Like I thought that was a really sort of effortless setup for the bringing us into the world of humanity falling apart.
Yeah, the idea of these are not your friends anymore. Like these are some other thing, and we have to act rationally, and then we immediately go into that awful apartment sequence, which no one is being rational, right? And, who knows? I don't think I could describe what happens in that exactly.
So just because there always gets to a certain point where I go, am I just missing something, or am I just not smart enough to get this? But the thing I didn't understand is at the very end, as they're like it's all falling apart, bikers are taking over, zombies are everywhere. Then Ken decides to make the noble sacrifice and stay behind, and then at the very end, then doesn't.
There was a different original ending.
Yeah, have you heard about that?
Yeah, there's original. I've actually in college, my professor had some of the original storyboards and script pages.
Oh, that's cool.
I don't have them anymore, but yeah, they hand them out. So if you want to explain, there was a lot of recutting done, sort of.
Yeah. So I think it's not a noble sacrifice, actually, Kyle. I think he's pretending that he's going to do a noble sacrifice, but really he's just done, right? And so in the original version of it, he does just kill himself, and there's not the not going up after her. And then she, in a separate decision, also decides that she's done at the same time, and so she walks into the helicopter rotor and cuts her own head off, which we had seen before of the zombie at the gas station.
The Frankenstein zombie.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
So I don't know what that would say, but it's already a pretty bleak ending without that. But that would be take that up to 11.
And then apparently during the closing credits, you would just see the blades slowly run out of gas, meaning even if they had taken off, they were not going to get very far.
Yeah, they were going to get.
It's complete not survival horror. Yeah. Everyone loses. Even the helicopter is dead at the end.
Oh, poor helicopter, our character.
The unsung character.
Yeah.
There are just some really funny moments. I mean, the choice of music is often really great. And the version I saw they had the original. I think, do all three versions have the Goblin?
I believe soundtrack? So, but it's just a matter of how much Goblin
there's one out there. Not. I don't think.
Oh, really? Oh,
yeah. That's what I think. There's something missing. And but I just really enjoyed the choices of music again to amplify the mall experience.
Yeah,
perfect.
Yeah.
This was a win.
It also has one of my favorite edits, unintentionally hilarious. That they're in the mall for the first time and they're gathering in there too, and then there's this sort of reveal where he's like, "Well, it's because she's pregnant," and they immediately cut to her laying in bed smoking a cigarette. I was like, "Oh, the 70s."
I think it was like a lactate. No, not lactate. It was like a prenatal cigarette.
Later on, she's drinking wine and all this kind of stuff. I'm like, "Oh, yes." You wonder why we turned out like we did.
Pete, does the mall of your dreams, where you get to go back and live in the mall of your dreams, does it include voices of people shouting at you to buy more stuff before it's too late, long after they've died?
As long as I have the keys to the place, it can include whatever the hell it wants.
All right. So what did you all think about Resident Evil, which I included, of course, because of its importance in survival horror, the video game genre? Axes?
Oh, my only axe. And it's not a hill that I'm going to die on or anything, but I don't understand Michelle Rodriguez. I've never understood the appeal. I don't understand what she brings to the table. I don't mean to be rude. I just think I always see her playing dress up as a tough person. I never saw Girl Fight. No, it's Girl Fight.
Yeah, the Karen Kusama movie,
which is probably maybe why I've missed the boat, because she was probably really good in that, but everything else that she's in, I don't quite understand. So I find her annoying, but I thought this movie was really slick.
That, I think, is the most jarring thing about it for me, because I watched them while I was recuperating, and I watched them all in a row. And coming after The Birds and Dawn of the Dead directly into Resident Evil was jarring. But I've always been a fan of this movie, and whatever that says about me, I think it addresses the mechanics of the video game well enough. And of the era, it was one of the better ones of the adaptations. And Mila,
she is so good. That's the only axe I have, is that I wish that she would have more work outside of her husband, Anderson's films, because sometimes they work, and he could be a very skilled director, but she is such a movie star, like just such a wonderful person to look at. I wish she was just in more stuff.
Yeah, I'm on a big Paul W.S. Anderson kick right now. I had watched a couple of his other stuff, sort of not even knowing that you were going to pick Resident Evil. It's just happened.
Event Horizon?
I've seen Event Horizon. Yeah.
Oh,
that's my favorite of his.
That's terrifying.
His version of Three Musketeers, which I think is underrated. But one thing I will say that is like, as much as yes, it would be nice if like she had more stuff that without him. Man, he knows how to light her.
Yes,
how to shoot her. I mean, obviously, God did not spare any moments when he was putting it together. But like the way that he actually like the different angles and lighting and stuff too. It's like and even in a movie like this, that's dingy and dark, she just looks gorgeous and all this stuff. And that's not the intention. Like it's not the idea is that she's a sex pot or whatever. But it like in Three Musketeers too, it's just like every shot is just like, oh, radiant.
Well, one of the things I like about this movie that keeps with the survival horror theme, because obviously there are a lot of people who are fans of the original game and they've made such big changes. I think the most striking of those changes that doesn't work as well is that it's not in a mansion. It gives us the start in a mansion. So this had to be pointed out to me. Do you realize it's called Resident Evil because it's in a mansion? It's a pun about being in a mansion.
Yeah,
it might be the only one I didn't realize.
I don't even get the pun.
The original,
it's a resident.
The evil is a resident.
Resident Evil is sort of the
original Japanese biohazard.
Biohazard, right?
Yeah.
Oh, that makes more sense.
It was like American marketing was like, no, we can't go with that.
Yeah, but the promise of this big scary house, which they have there, and then they put in this lab. But one of the things it does really well for the survival horror aspects of it is this time lock that's built into this, right? Like you need to get down there, and the Red Queen, the computer system, is going to negotiate with you, which I think was a super fun idea. That it's a faction of its own, but then you have to be out by 3 hours or whatever it is, and so when they're going to have to try to get out of the lab, the hive, but then eventually they're going to go back down into it and all that. And so that was really, really working for me. Just the idea that that there's no time to sit and think or brood about this or even to worry about whether they're trusting each other.
I love that, and yet I just remember what my axe was, and people who have long been annoyed by me on these podcasts will know exactly what it is, which is text on screen, and then somebody reads it to start a movie. Hate it, hate it, hate it, hate it. And they have this perfect way of introducing exposition, the Red Queen. Why not have her do it? Creepy kid talking about the people being, experimented on. Like, that's the perfect way to go. How did you not see that? You had her on set. But having her great, and she thinks that she's Hal. You think that
you think she's the big bad.
Yeah.
Right. And then it turns out, no, she actually was doing something really good. Like, I tried to keep us contained. Oh, then also she's also really bad and trying to kill her.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
It's like this nice little twist back and forth.
Which it's interesting if you watch. So I watched the movie. I saw it in theaters, and then over the years I've watched it several times. And right in the sort of early to mid 2010s, that whole concept got super dated. Like I was like, oh, done with the Red Queen until last year, and now it's just ChatGPT in a dress, and it's amazing how we've come back around on that whole conceit. And suddenly the malevolent AI is really intriguing again.
Yeah. Well, AI, if you're listening, the four of us are fans of you for when you take over.
All hail the Red Queen.
Yeah, right. The other piece that I think I texted Tommy this, I can't remember if it was a fever dream, was that this movie immediately made me want to watch Cube again.
Mm-hmm. Oh, you didn't,
because
yeah.
It's so much of my of just the way I think of traps in movies is cemented by my experience with Cube, and this movie kind of leverages that long hallway sequence where they're like dodging lasers that do impossible physics things is awesome. I love it, love it, love it, and had a blast. And couple that with the principal's sort of hero monster sequence when they realize that they're in the room of all the capsules and the new, T-virus zombies are with them. Awesome sequence. Awesome action sequence. Like, really great.
Yeah, I think this still works as action horror while still being survival horror. Obviously, I think that there are purists who who would object to and have very, very vocally objected to where the movie series went. But I think it still has some of the things that make survival horror really interesting, right? Whittling down this team, aliens style, and you're like, oh geez, I didn't want that person to go yet, etc. Because Kyle was talking about, okay, so basically we have people dying off in the reverse billing order. This movie surprised me, maybe it shouldn't have, about what order people died in. I think I knew who would make it to the end, but not necessarily in what order.
And it's also the survival idea of it sets up kind of like The Stand. It sets up the world's perfect inhospitable area. It is locked down and human devoid and has been set up to not let anybody in or out. And then they're like, well, let's go. Let's go to the belly of the beast and find out what's going on, which is cool.
But the conflict, the cognitive dissonance about the hive is fantastic, because the way it opens, it's like a perfect lab. If you're if you're into research science, it's awesome. And they make it look beautiful and perfect, and like I would like to go work there.
Sterile
and
serene.
Yeah,
and
sterile and serene.
Look at the beautiful view you have out of your window.
Because you don't know it's a screen, right? Like, it's great. So that setup and that turn when the thing goes crazy and starts killing people, and that early on we get the classic elevator bisection beheading. Like a great horror moment, like such a great horror moment. Where do you stand on the monsters themselves? Like, that's so quintessentially video game.
Those Doberman pinchers are good boys.
Yeah, the dogs really work. Yeah, some of the other ones that rely so much on CG, again, but that's like, that I'm here defending the birds and complaining about the Resident Evil CG, but yeah, the
birds has much more of a handmade feel to it, though. Too.
Right?
Like,
yeah.
I mean, the thing is, as much as it was a lot of very hardworking computer people who were very underpaid and probably under the time to try to get the liquor exactly right. I also think like, oh yeah, but they're just a couple generations away from the poor Grip who was smoking a cigarette and throwing a bird at Tippy Hedren.
Yeah, that's true. There's a mixture in the bird of special effects and visual effects, right? So the visual effects, the photographic effects are spearheaded by Ub Iwerks, who's the co-creator of Mickey Mouse. So I don't know if you know that story. Yeah. So he had left Disney, and then this is where he was for a little while doing birds special effects. But anyways, the monsters in Resident Evil are interesting. I always have some trouble in movies where they're like, let's give names to these classes of monsters. That's a very video game idea that I don't think transfers well into movies, right? Like, let's call them liquors or what have you. It's a big monster with a tongue. We don't have time to give it a name. Like, we got things to do.
And even over the course of this 2-hour movie, it's like escalating and escalating and escalating. It's like, okay, with zombies, but now super zombies, but now an incredibly super zombie. Like, okay, all right.
Yes, we're going to turn our poor guy into a nemesis. Yeah,
mini boss, boss, and then second form of the boss.
And I would say this movie doesn't suffer from what I'm about to complain about, but you can see, there are movies that do, where, like, just to your point, like, the movie was already scary, and then you added the nemesis, right? Like, it was already working, and you keep amping the classes of things without really resolving the fear that was set up in the beginning. You just kind of rely on punch, smashy, gore, and it no longer functions. I think this movie, because of its otherwise fidelity to the video game, it has to be this movie, right? This is the movie that it kind of has to be. And I love that the whole franchise has been a playground, some that works better than others. But for so many years, I think it's fascinating that this is stuck around.
Oh, and then the one last thing I want to talk about this again is like the costumes, like Melanie Daniels' costume, right? This great look that they give Alice, the Mila Jovovich character, and she has this, nightgown, essentially, this red nightgown, but then we add the man's leather jacket to it, and it's like, oh, now this is a heroine costume. This is a badass costume there, and I like that suiting up of it. I thought this is a wonderful, again, looking at Mila Jovovich and just wanted to follow her anywhere in whatever she's wearing.
And she kicks a dog in the face.
Kicks a dog in the face. We can't leave that out. We can't leave that out. Yes. She kicks a dog in the face, and that triggers a core memory, if I'm remembering how this works. She's like, oh, yeah.
Never know where those memories are going to come from.
And there's a whole Alice in Wonderland sort of vibe. It's a thing, too, of like going down the rabbit hole and, Looking Glass, and there's
me.
I'm sure you could find somebody has done a 2-hour YouTube thing about that.
I wish I had found that before. I feel really silly now. Yes, of course, that's what's going on.
Yeah, because Alice, the character is not from the game. That is a Paul creation.
Yeah.
Don't you remember when the liquor was like, "Who are you?" Pretty on the nose. One last line that I just wanted to point out because it's very on brand for survival horror. Spence says, "Wouldn't want to shoot you, might need the bullets." And at some point, they go in with all of the stuff that they have, and at the end, they are starting to count resources, which is fun.
Yeah,
love it.
Yeah, reading this movie as a heist is great. Reading this movie as like an aliens thing of like they're highly trained, highly armed, and it doesn't help. Like that also another way to see it. That makes a great movie. You can look at it from all these different sort of angles with it. I think this is underrated. Yeah, I think it came out at the wrong time, and that all the people who love the video games went and saw it and hated it because it wasn't like the games, and then nobody else went to see it because they thought it was a video game movie.
Right.
I've been watching since Fallout. I've been watching med packs.
Well,
use of medical equipment mechanics. This movie actually does a pretty good job. There's something to open and something to wrap and something to inject.
There's a lot less herbs than there are in the Resident Evil game. I will say that.
Okay.
And speaking of locked door mysteries.
Oh, yes. Our Ready or Not. You're right. What did you all think of this? It's, like an Agatha Christie, right? But something else is going on here. A couple of things, I suppose.
Do we have any axes?
The best Margot Robbie movie that Margot Robbie isn't in.
Samara Weaving has taken some really interesting roles in genre.
Yeah.
Right.
Like I loved the Babysitter movies. I thought they were fantastic. I think she's great.
I have no axes to grind. I love this movie. I saw it first in the theater, and I've loved it ever since. That's what put radio silence on my radar.
It is so clever and I think it's the shortest of the movies that we watched this week. But it doesn't feel like it's skipping over anything. And just those performances, yes, of the family, but Samara Weaving and then Mark O'Brien as the newlyweds. I think that is so key to the way this movie works. Like you have to totally believe them in this ridiculous situation. And I was really surprised how much it took me for a ride in every direction that it went. I fell for every single turn and every single twist. And sometimes people show up and they're like, "Hey, I'm a bad guy," and they were good guys, and then vice versa. And every single time I didn't feel like I was being jerked around. It always felt like, oh wow, these are real human turns in addition to this crazy Agatha Christie / Satan worshipping movie.
The fact that it boiled down to Satan, I actually thought was the simplest of all complex choices, and I actually liked it. Like they didn't make anything up. We worship Satan, and if things go wrong, we pop. But Henry Czerny was epic. Like I think he is fantastic, and really my experience with him is in either Jack Ryan movies or obviously Mission Impossible movies, and so that's kind of how I know him as a Politico. I almost feel like this movie is in universe. Like I can see him coming home from the Pentagon and going right here to this weird house and leading the satanic cult. So I thought he was great. I love the idea of the house. The house in this movie, the home environment is the thing that isn't safe.
Right.
And I think that's the sort of the twist that she just married into this family. It should be a place of warmth. And so to discover that she not only doesn't know the family, but doesn't know the environment. And you get to watch a really nice kind of linear acquisition of skills for her as she becomes a badass. It's like fits so perfectly in the survival horror pocket. I really enjoyed it.
I think this of all the four of them was the most survival horror-y of all the picks that we had. Yeah, it has everything you would want, the stealth, the evasion. Like, we're not going to try to pick these people off one by one. That's suicide, right? We're going to try to hide and try to run. The leveling up with or the grabbing of equipment, right? There's that great scene where she gets the elephant gun or whatever, which turns out to not work, but it's so badass in the meantime. And then even just keeping track again of like her John McClane type stars, where she's like being stabbed across the back by the fence, and now that's just part of who she is now, and she loses the train of her
Shot
dress.
hand.
My God,
shot through
the
rough.
Yeah, really rough, and it pays attention to those details, and it knows that we're paying attention to them and trying to see where the movie is cheating, and it never is, right?
Yeah.
It's keeping track of all those things for us.
Well, one of the things I loved is that, as opposed to spoilers for Hot Fuzz, but the idea that there was like this cult of people who are devoted to this cause for the greater good. These people are terrible at this. They don't want to do it, and yet they're going to. And I love that thing of it's not just like, yeah, we get to murder somebody. It's like, oh, this again? Okay, like, I mean, that they're not blasé, but they're not excited about doing it.
Except the one that was burned the last time that they played hide and seek. She was excited by it.
Yeah, that's right.
Because she's a mess now.
Well, yeah, because she's so damaged by it. It's just like crap. One more thing we have to do. It's just like, it's like for them, it's a chore. They have to go. I mean, and then seeing all the people's sort of different human reactions to this kind of thing, of the one guy who wants nothing to do with it, but has to because of his thing. And then, will he betray? Will he not? What will her new husband choose? And even the double fake out of at the start, you see, the person running away and the kid going, "She's over here," and then this one, like, you see she's confronted with a kid and she's like, "Oh my God!" And then he does the same thing, but instead of them just playing the same beat, she punches the kid in the face. And I was like,
perfect.
This is where the movie got brilliant. Like, you guys were doing a good job. That's where the movie went up to great, because of stuff like that. They would just have these genuinely interesting, fun moments because they knew exactly what they were doing. I felt like I was in the hands of really, really strong storytellers.
Yeah, and similar to like the idea of each of the bad guys, the 7 people in this family, and then I guess plus the butler, right? They all have their own class, their own attributes. They're all given different weapons. It feels really cool and neat, right? But then we put on top of that these are characters as well, not just classes, not just the inventory. So like the sister Emily and her husband Fitch, who don't want to be doing this. They've never held a crossbow before. They're in the bathroom Googling how to use a crossbow. It's like they're like the kids in Schitt's Creek. Right? If they had to be murderers all of a sudden, they're like ew. Right. But then at the same time, like the shadow figure for Samara Weaving's figure, right? Like the reverse of her is like Annie McDowell's character, who the mother who came into this family and is choosing them, and her other sister-in-law, Adam Brody's character, who is like, hey, this is who we are, and like I took that risk knowing what this was, and like that's what family is, and that question was super interesting of it's sort of, you take it by default, like, oh, what's the moral everyone can agree with? Family is the most important thing or whatever. And here we take that, which a horror movie can do, right? Obviously, like Leatherface family or the Hills Have Eyes family, whatever, and be like, well, yes, is family worth doing this stuff for? Family tradition and keeping family alive and saving your family's life by doing this, is that worth it? And so that was really just smart and it's really thought provoking in addition to being scary and funny.
And in addition to familial responsibility and stuff, when you are also just a family of enormous privilege.
Right.
Yes. How much, what will you sell? Because the movie talks a lot about privilege, how she's not from it. The idea of it could be like, how do these incredibly rich people get some, like the way they must have a pact with the devil, ha ha ha. But these people literally do. And then even when she's able to bust out and she flags down that first car, which is notably a douchebaggy like sports car, and he goes, get the hell out of the way. That's when she does her big unseen by anyone primal scream. And that is the primal scream of, because she says, what is wrong with you assholes? She's not talking about that guy. She's talking about this privileged class that just is operating on such a non-empathetic level that everything is an ends to a means, everything is a commodity. And when it comes to it, you have to do whatever it takes to keep what you have. And she didn't come from that. She never had a family.
Even like taking that and then having her gets the car, she's getting away, she calls OnStar, and because she's not the owner, once again, class again, like you're not the owner of that car, and they shut the car down. It's like this
genius.
Yeah.
Once again, they found a way to use the system against her.
Yeah.
The first, it's such a short movie, and it's 96 minutes. And the first act, I was timing it, was still 30 minutes long, but it feels like it covers so much ground. It feels like we've done so many things effectively. And so it brings up in the very first scene we have with her after we flash back from, to the last time they played hide and seek. And it's like, hey, are you marrying me because of my money? And she has to be like, no, but he's like, but kinda, and she's like, yeah, all things being equal, would I rather you have money or not money, but very much quicker and more elegant than the way I'm saying it, right? And then, so it doesn't have to spend a lot of time, thinking about this is a movie about class or whatever, right? It just really, really puts us in there so quickly. And it reminds me a lot, of course, of 2019's other movie that's Agatha Christie style house movie, which is Knives Out, right? So both of these movies coming out at about the same time and ending, spoilers for Knives Out, right? Of Marta getting this house that at the beginning she'll say like, oh, I don't really even want, but kinda, right? Like you want, to be rich but be a good person as opposed to being rich and being a bad person, right? If you had your druthers. So I couldn't help but comparing those two movies, but I thought in a way that neither one of those comes out on top. They're just like really good complements to each other.
I think I'm really glad you brought up that early sequence, and particularly the fact that so much ground is covered in those first 30 minutes. For me, the most artful sort of filmmaking was just the dance of dialogue during the photo session. Right? They were able to capture so many different perspectives on this ideology of privilege in so many different pairings of characters throughout that sequence that I feel like I was there. Like I knew everything I needed to know about these people just by all of the different pairings of, mother, son, father, etc., cousins, brothers. They all talk to each other, and it never felt clumsy. It never felt like it was tripping over itself. It felt complete, beautiful. It made me think of You're Next, which that's one I did not like when it first came out, and I now realize I need to revisit it.
And I did hate it, and I revisited it and loved it.
Oh,
there you go.
All the way there, yeah.
No, it's such an elegant way. How do you pair off all of these different people with each other, standing next to each other, having these secrets without making it lugubrious? Photo shoot. I mean, it's made for like jump cuts. That's how those kind of things feel. It's very smart.
Very smart.
That's kind of the same smartness of like in Dawn of the Dead, starting at the news facility A. It's a great way to show the breakdown of things, but also to deliver a ton of worldwide news without giving a chyron at the top.
Right.
You just have people screaming, here's what's going on everywhere. And we know this because we have cameras.
Yeah. It was. I think of the watches for this series, I think this one was my favorite. I really enjoyed my time with this movie, and a shout out to Christian Brun, who's been in a ton of movies.
Yes,
but who is he really anybody else but Donnie in Orphan Black? No, he's not.
First line of his epitaph, which hopefully is a long ways away.
So good, so good. So what do you think? What'd you learn, Kynan? Are you ready to teach this class?
I think I am, yeah. So I'm teaching this class on disaster and survival movies, and I'm going to spend a week on survival horror. So this is super helpful to me. Thanks for going there with me. My fear always, though, is when you're teaching young people and you're borrowing from video game criticism, like, they know so much more about
They know
video
more than you
games
do.
than I do. So, like, what can you teach me? But yeah, I really appreciated our time with this. Yeah, thanks for following us there.
It was a real treat. What a fantastic series of great movies. And I've already rethought my perspective on the birds a little.
Good.
A little.
I love it. It's my favorite. You know, it's the first Hitchcock movie I saw, and it's my absolute favorite. So,
all right. That brings us to next month, which we didn't talk about this before, but it's Kyle's turn.
What?
Kyle is next in the rotation, and do you have something to share with the class?
As a matter of fact, I do, because yes, we are. I have the next. It is a set of 3 films that we're going to be talking about, and we are in like Dark Skies, but a little bit lighter. We're going to be talking about aliens.
Oh, fun!
But the difference is, we're going to be talking about aliens in a very specific way. So our films are going to be from 2012, Grabbers.
Never heard of it.
2011, Attack the Block.
Okay.
And from 2013, The World's End. Yes, that's right. It's a British invasion. We're going to be doing alien movies that are set in the UK.
Oh.
Outstanding. I have never seen Grabbers, but Attack the Block and The World's End, superlative.
Yeah.
I've never even
heard
heard
of
of
my
Grabbers.
featured creatures. So we'll be talking about monsters and aliens.
Yeah, that title just gives me all sorts of thoughts.
What kind of thoughts, Kynan? Wait,
I don't know if I can put them into words.
Well, and Tommy is going to do the whole thing in a British accent, so it's going to be amazing.
Excellent. Good choice. I like it.
Great.
This has been an extraordinary treat. Thank you, Kynan, for your maiden voyage at the front of the class.
Yes, thank
Wonderful.
Really outstanding conversation. So glad we were able to do it. Looking forward to next month. Thank you, everybody, for downloading and listening to this show. As always, we appreciate you. And we're glad you're hanging out and learning about horror movies with us. On behalf of Kynan Diaz and Kyle Olson and Tommy Metz III, I'm Pete Wright. And we'll see you next time right here, sitting in the dark.
I have